Hey everybody, it's Tuesday, it's 3 o'clock, that means it's Tech Tuesday. I'm Rick Uzzi. Today I'm going to be talking about the state of broadband here in the United States, especially as we start to look at ways that we can improve speeds and possibly reduce prices for folks that need broadband here in this country. So I'll be back in just a minute. Hey, thanks for joining me. So again, today's topic is the state of broadband in the U.S. and what we're going to do today is kind of look at where we are, where we've come as well, because a lot's changed in the last several years, especially in the last year, as far as broadband accessibility here in the United States as well as other countries. You know, we've had the pandemic, and that's showed us that broadband is very important. It also showed us that our broadband in general is very resilient, that we didn't have a lot of issues. Where we had good broadband, we didn't have a lot of issues. They were able to keep up with the significant increases in throughput that we saw, especially in the upstream. So broadband providers came through this very well. We still have some issues that we'll talk about. And what we'll try to do is put this in perspective, because you're seeing a lot of opinions on both sides as to where we are and what we need to be doing. There's some concerns based on the kind of the outline of the Biden infrastructure plan and the broadband piece of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So here, for example, is an article in the Verge. I guess it is Verge. And it says this is a map of America's broadband problem, and it says a county by county look at the broadband gap. So we look at this map. I'll come over here. Yeah, there we go. So we look at this map, and it does look pretty bad. So actually, the light gray areas are the good ones, so to speak, and then the light blue is where we've got some gaps. So what they're saying is, in this, they said, if broadband access was a problem before 2020, the pandemic turned it into a crisis. As everyday business moved online, city council meetings or court proceedings became near inaccessible to anyone whose connection couldn't support a Zoom call. And we did see that in some places where suddenly kids were at home having to do school, had parents at work having to do work remotely, and maybe if they didn't have a good broadband connection, especially with everybody at home, kind of trying to do the same thing at the same time, then you had maybe some issues. It says some kids set up in McDonald's parking lots just to get reliable enough connection to be able to do schoolwork. So this is obviously an issue in some areas of the country. Now we need to remember that we've got a really huge country compared to lots of others, so there are just going to be inherently some issues there based on our size and the fact that we're so spread out. It says in this map, the colored in areas show U.S. counties where less than 15% of households are using the internet at broadband speed, defined as 25 megabits per second download speed, which is the Fcc broadband definition is 25 down and 3 megabits per second up. And they say here that's already a pretty low threshold for calling something high-speed internet, but since it's the FCC standard, we'll stick with it. So yeah, there's certainly, you can get higher than 25 megabits per second in lots of places, but that's still pretty fast, and I think it's still fast enough certainly to support Zoom and some other things. It may not be the best kind of internet connection if you're wanting to stream several HD TV programs at the same time, but we're not talking about that as far as access to broadband in emergency situations or for kids at school, that kind of thing. Most large-scale assessments of American broadband access rely on FCC data, a notoriously inaccurate survey drawn from ISPs' own descriptions of the areas they serve. And that's true because the way that the FCC has put their map together, if an ISP reports that in a particular census block, at least one customer has service at, let's say, the 25 by 3 speed, then that whole census block is considered served, even if it's just like a handful of customers or even just one customer in that census block. If the majority could not have that kind of access, and it would still be reported as served. So there is an issue with the FCC mapping, and the FCC's been looking at that, and they are now in the process of trying to come up with a better way to do maps, including having subscribers self-report. As I talked a few weeks ago, there's an issue with how looks like they're going to do that. They have an app out there that will let the subscribers run a speed test, and that will report their broadband speed. But of course, if they're at home on their phone and they're connecting through their Wi-Fi, then how is that really an accurate picture of their broadband connection? It's not. So I think they need to look at this and how they can get, maybe through a combination of reporting from the ISPs and customers reporting as to whether that's true or accurate, then maybe they can come up with some some accurate maps. But as you drill in on this map, so I'm gonna go into Georgia here because this is, I'm familiar with Georgia. I live there. So as I drill in on this map, this is the Metro Atlanta area. This is Fulton County where Atlanta is, and this is North Fulton here, and then Atlanta is somewhere around here, I believe, this general vicinity. And then you've got Cobb County. So in Fulton, it's showing 73% are using broadband speed. Cobb County, a wealthy county in the northern suburbs, there's 65%. Cherokee County, 69%. Forsyth County, 93%. So 81% Gwinnett. So you've got various in the Atlanta metro area. These counties all around here in the Atlanta metro area. There's pretty good percent of people that are using broadband speed at this 25/3 or at least 25 megabits per second download. Then you've got these blue areas. Franklin County, 10%, 13% Madison, 9% Oglethorpe. I was going to go ahead and zoom in on this lower portion of Georgia since it's kind of easy to identify. So this is Seminole County in Georgia. That's about as big as that gets. So we look at that. It says there's 14% using broadband speed. And what they're claiming as far as these numbers, they say, what was it here? Yeah, I couldn't highlight this for some reason. It says, instead of the FCC data, we drew on an anonymized data set collected by Microsoft through its cloud services network, published in increments by the company over the past 18 months. So they're claiming instead of the FCC's data, they're using this Microsoft data. So is that accurate? I don't know. But as I wanted to look at this a couple different ways. So first I want to look at the FCC map and show what it shows. So this is the FCC map of the same area of the Seminole County. And if we click in here, we see an area like this. Actually, I'm going to go back. Let me back out here again. Oops, here it is. I was going to click in here because this is Donaldson, Georgia. So if I look at this area, this is reported as having pretty good broadband. So you've got Mediacom here at using cable modem service at, it looks like a gig down and 50 megabits per second up. Then you've got Windstream. They have fiber doing symmetrical gig data right there. And then you've got, they say they've got ADSL at 100 megabits per second. Mediacom also has a 100 by 10, and then you've got some satellite kind of services which are available pretty much everywhere. And they obviously are not doing very well. They do meet according to this, they meet the broadband standard here, at least this one, 25/3. Real world, I don't know, but that's what they're putting down. So again, this is self-reported. So its accuracy is questionable. So as I look at this, again, this is within the Donaldson. All of these areas are pretty good. So I'll look at another area that's kind of near town and similar kind of thing. It's got the same kinds of providers, the gig, symmetrical gig by Windstream. You've got Mediacom in here. As I go north, just a little bit north of Donaldson, I'm going to click this big area. You can see things change. So here you've got Windstream saying that they've just got the ADSL service at 100 megabits per second symmetrical. Then you've just got the satellite stuff. So suddenly you've lost quite a bit there as we go further north. And I'm going to go north again. Pretty much the same thing. You've got some more. You've got 100 by 50. And then you've got some Windstream ADSL where it's saying you can just get maybe 4 by 1 or 3 by 768. So you're going to have customers in these areas that are going to be getting less speed. Now, Windstream is in the process of upgrading a lot of their plant, and they're actually working in conjunction with some electric membership co-ops in some of these areas that are not around cities, that are kind of your more rural areas, and getting kind of partnered with them to get access to their poles and those kinds of things, maybe providing service in conjunction with them. So Windstream's making an effort, so we should be seeing improvement here. So I just wanted to show that on the FCC map too. And now what I wanted to show was on a Google map what we're looking at here. So this is Donaldson, Georgia, the same area. And you can see this is a tiny little town. This is the county right here. This is the state line, Alabama, Georgia state line right here. And then you look around here and you see lots of these little white areas. So this is farm area. If we zoom in here, we again look at Donaldson and you can see, I'm going to zoom in. And, it's the town where we were just looking, and here's where they have pretty good access. Again, they've got really good access. Actually, they got the gig symmetrical downspeed from Windstream, and they've got Mediacom in there providing good access as well, good service. But as soon as you go a little bit north or south, that's what you see. You see no people. You see lots of farmland. I can zoom in a little bit and I can find some customers. But that's the challenge that we have in vast parts of the country. So here I've got a customer, right? I have another customer here. So here's a few customers that are clustered together. But then I've got big areas where here's a customer, another farm customer. There's a couple here. So you can see there might be one or two customers per mile, or maybe even just a customer per mile or less, right? So you got basically a farm. So this is the challenge that we have in this country. So as people look at broadband and they say, oh, so many areas don't have broadband, well, this is part of the reason, because it's very expensive, especially if you're going to try to do something like fiber, to deploy all of that fiber and then only have a few customers per mile to be able to recoup those costs. So obviously, in some areas like this, wireless might be an option if this is a flat area and you've got line of sight. There might be people that are using their cellular service for broadband here. But that's the issue that we have. It's the size of our country and the amount of rural areas that we've got. So what does that mean as far as the United States versus other areas? Because again, a lot of what's happening right now is people are talking about other countries, because they'll say, oh, the broadband is so much better in these other countries because the government gets more involved. It may be completely subsidized by the government, those kinds of things. And there's concerns. There's a concern here in this country from your private internet operators, could be public companies, but not government, for example, your private internet service providers, that the government might get too involved with regulation, whether that be price caps, which we've seen in New York. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago. They've tried to fix pricing there and make broadband providers stick to a $15 plan for low-income folks. So there's concerns about that the government's going to get involved in pricing. There's concerns that in this new Biden infrastructure bill, they're talking about taking away all, making sure that municipalities can offer internet, that there's no encumbrance on that. And it can be good for a muni to offer internet, but if there's already private competition in there, they're concerned that if you've got a municipality, a city that's funded by taxpayer money, then it's really hard for a private company to compete in those areas. So there's a balance there that we need to make sure that we have. So that's the concern. So let's try to take a look at what's going on with broadband in the United States and Europe. This was a Fair Internet Report, Europe versus US Broadband Performance 2020. And this is saying here, unexpected bonus, 2020's unexpected bonus, and this would be due to the pandemic, is the US internet speeds doubled in 2020. So there's been good progress this past year. And in fact, as we'll see here in a minute, over several years, there's been good progress in the United States. US broadband speeds increased 91% from 2019 to 2020, nearly doubling year over year as measured by annual speed test medians. US average broadband speeds overtook Western EU countries like the UK, France, and Germany for the first time in 5 years. Broadband speeds in the EU overall rose 57% from 2019 to 2020, but that's 34% lower than the 91% performance increase in the US. So everybody's increased, but the US had a significant increase above what they did in these Western EU countries. US internet speeds in 2020 doubled from 33.16 megabits per second, up from 17.34 in 2019. The US still lags behind many European and developed nations worldwide, and its major cities also often lag behind their European equivalents. That said, there's cause for celebration in Dallas, Seattle, and Austin, after our analysis shows that these cities are performing extremely well relative to most European capital cities. So we'll see here that there are other factors involved, but it is saying that, and this is true, that there are other nations that have really good broadband, but there are reasons for that as well. The US is 50% slower than the fastest EU nations. Denmark and Switzerland, 2 to 3 times faster than the EU average. Italy, apparently not doing well, continues to have the worst internet in the EU, often under 40% of other nations. So we look at this chart here. Can't quite see it. Hold on. See if I can reduce that. There we go. So we've got Denmark and Switzerland leading, and we've got Sweden and the Netherlands and Finland and Belgium and Norway. So these are the countries that are actually doing better. Then you've got the United States, below that Germany, UK, Poland, France. But one thing to remember here is that the tax rates in these countries tend to be very high. So there may be some government subsidies going on here. The government could be fairly heavily involved, in which case, like I say, these are some of the highest taxed people in the world, I think, in some of these countries. So there's something to be said for that. If we look at U.S. versus Europe major city internet performance results, many U.S. and EU cities saw 100% plus jumps in speed in 2020. Austin increased nearly 3 times, from 22.63 megabits per second to 64.72. Amsterdam nearly 2% or 2 times faster, from 31.21 to 60.31. Dallas greatly improved, doubling from 20.25 to 39.61, and Los Angeles even saw a 28% increase. Seattle speeds went from 70% up 70%, went up 70%, wow, from 28.22 megabits per second in 2019 to 47.95 megabits per second in 2020. So there's definitely been an increase this last year. And again, you can zoom in here and we see this particular, can I see who this is? It's not telling me who. That line, oh, that line is Stockholm. Okay, so kind of up and down. But here's Austin. So you see Austin's taken a big rise here. You've got Seattle has really improved. Dallas, you got New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles. So those are U.S. cities in relation to some of these other European cities right there. Comparing population with broadband speed, this is kind of critical, and they mention it here. So this year's internet speed test data showed an interesting correlation between population and real-world broadband speeds. And then the key sentence here. The data seems to imply that if you live in a country with a small population, you're vastly more likely to experience faster internet speeds. And that should be a given. You would expect that. Again, you've got the United States way out here in population, but if you've got a small population like some of these countries that are ahead of the U.S., it's going to be a little bit easier to provide broadband speed because it's a small country. You don't have that big a population. Everybody's kind of packed in together, consolidated compared to the U.S. And as I showed you on that map, in the U.S., you've got these vast areas where you've got farmland or woods and swamp and other stuff where if there are people, there's very few of them. You know, you've got very few people, so it's going to be harder to do that. So this, I think, is a key reason that here in the U.S., even though we're doing very well, we're not ahead of some of these other countries that are small as far as population and as far as their size, their geographic area. U.S. broadband versus developed nations. The U.S. broadband speed measurements increased 35% more than their counterparts in other developed countries, seeing a 91% overall increase compared to 56% aggregate increase in other developed nations worldwide. Despite the U.S. results against various European countries, when compared to high-income developed nations as a whole, the U.S. now is performing strongly. So you see this light blue line. This is this is the U.S. here. And you can see it was, there's more of a gap here. A few years ago, 2016, 2017, 2018, it's got a lot closer, 2019, and here in 2020, we surpassed that. So we are actually now ahead in that area. So then here we see the countries where the U.S. fits, and you can see kind of squarely in the middle there. But again, thinking about the size of the U.S., it's up at the top, population-wise, and again, just basically area-wise, way at the top here, but yet we're in the middle of the pack. So there are reasons for that. And then you've got these countries that are in the lead. Again, mostly these smaller countries that are all kind of in the same general vicinity. And you've got your other EU countries down here. And then again, for some reason, Italy down at the very bottom. This shows U.S. versus France. You can see the U.S. was behind 2017 and 2018 passed France. Versus Germany, again, kind of behind up until about 2018 and then surpassed that. So, and then Italy been ahead the whole time. Italy not doing so well. And then versus the Netherlands, this is one where behind, got a little closer in 2018. It looks like the Netherlands is, that gap has increased again right there. And then this is versus Spain. U.S. again passed them sometime between 2017 and 2018. United Kingdom, looks like the U.S. passed sometime around mid-2019 as far as beating the U.K. So you can see that the U.S. is doing very well. This is, I think, a fairly objective report. We've got another report here from U.S. Telecom that I was going to show. Now, this is the U.S. Telecom. So there's, these guys are wanting to show that the U.S. is doing much better than the EU. So they talk about the trends. This is from the president, I believe, president and CEO, Jonathan Spalter. He says, Congress and the administration are stepping up with historic funding that works shoulder to shoulder with broadband companies to close the digital divide. And that's really what they want to do. They want to work shoulder to shoulder. They don't want the government to come in and put in a bunch of mandates, unfunded mandates especially, regulations, pricing, whatever else they might do that could jeopardize the private internet industry, basically capitalism that we have going on in this country. This means confronting persistent myths with data-driven facts when it comes to assessing the state of U.S. broadband. One of the most common misguided claims is that the European Union's more intensive framework for broadband regulation has somehow yielded a superior online experience for its consumers. So put another way, if the U.S. had followed the EU's more regulatory path, then our nation's digital divide could be more than triple what it is today, leaving an additional 39.5 million Americans without access to a broadband-fueled world of opportunities. So that is what people tend to say, is that, again, there's more regulation in the EU and we should do the same thing here in the United States. And they're making a case that we don't need to do that, we shouldn't do that. And as we see from this data, as well as the data we just saw previously, we really don't need to do that, because the issue is not so much government regulation. It's more about just the demographics, both of the size of the country and where people live is the biggest issue I think we have to overcome. Broadband companies invest more than 3 times as much in telecommunications infrastructure per household in the US than in the EU, about $700 per home each year. It says this has funded a cascade of additional benefits, from falling US broadband prices to greater network resilience in times of crisis, to the ability of American consumers to more fully utilize digital tools and resources, as evidenced by the fact that the average US subscriber uses 60% more data than its European counterparts. And prices have come down, not a great deal, but the other thing that happens that we forget about sometimes is that prices don't go up. So you may have started with your internet provider at maybe, 4 megabits per second was your plan, and over time, as they increase their infrastructure and their investment in their network and bring out, maybe switching to different types of fiber, or different methods of using fiber, DOCSIS 3.0, 3.1, as they improve the cable plant, your speeds have gone up. Bonding channels, those kinds of things. And generally, you don't get charged for that. So just the other day, I think I've got AT&T, and I just heard that I think my plan now includes more throughput than it did before. So they've made some kind of infrastructure upgrades, and now I'm benefiting from that. My price hasn't gone up. The U.S. leads because smart infrastructure has been advanced by smart policy that helps spark more than $1.8 trillion and counting in private sector U.S. infrastructure investment. Again, they're emphasizing private sector infrastructure investment, because with the way that we do business here, we've got, if there's a way to make money, companies are going to go out there and try to make money. And if you've got competition, that's going to drive prices down as well. And that's also going to give incentive to companies to improve their service. The U.S. handily leads the EU in both broadband infrastructure deployment and broadband adoption at all speeds. Deployment, U.S. leads EU by 12% at 30 megabits per second, 25 pp lead, percentage points lead for greater than or equal to 100 megabits per second. On adoption, the U.S. leads the EU by 9.4 percentage points, pp percentage points, 30 megabits per second, 21.4 points lead for 100 megabits per second. U.S. infrastructure advantage is most significant when comparing rural areas. Again, that's the challenge we have, is these rural areas, but yet we're doing fairly well when you look at rural areas in the U.S. compared to rural areas in some of these smaller countries. We have far more rural areas because it's a bigger country. U.S. broadband policy prices are declining, even as costs of many other essential goods and services continue to rise. Broadband providers invest substantially more in the U.S. versus the EU, 3 times or more. More collaborative public-private U.S. policy framework, rather than imposing heavy government regulation. So you do see that sometimes. You'll see this public-private partnership where you have municipalities that want to provide better internet for their community. They prefer not to get involved in that a lot of times. Sometimes they want to. It's like, yeah, we want to provide this service for our community. But a lot of times it's like, we just want better internet, and whoever's there now is not doing the job, but maybe we can partner with somebody. Maybe it is the incumbent there that they can partner with, or they bring in another company to partner with, to a private company to partner with, to provide some competition or to provide some impetus to get the service better there. And that way they're working with a private company, that maybe the private company does all the infrastructure, they lay the fiber, and the municipality offers and markets the service and bills and everything like that. So there are good opportunities for private-public partnerships rather than doing a strict public offering. Let's see, here we see some charts. So the U.S. leads the EU in broadband coverage at any speed. The lead extends substantially when comparing rural areas, despite the more restrictive U.S. definition of rural. So here you see these bars are non-rural, so this is all areas. And you've got the EU in the pinkish color, and the blue is U.S. all areas. Then you've got these lines are the rural areas. So you can see the percentage increases, or the gap here between the United States and the EU on this chart. We go here, and this is households covered with fixed broadband at NGA speed. I think that's 30 megabit, yeah, down here, 30 megabits per second is the definition of that. Some of these US speeds were at 25 by 3 from 2012 to 2014, but they're comparing that again at these speeds. Again, you're seeing a lead in the US on percentage on these. 12% points overall lead for the US and 20 percentage points in rural areas as you look at these figures. Households covered with fixed broadband at greater than or equal to 100 megabits per second, so this is getting a little faster, and you can see the lead extends to 25 percentage points in 2019 for greater than or equal to 100 megabits per second. So you see 2019 here. This is a 29, or these figures are from 2019. This report came out in 2021, but I guess the last figures they had were from 2019. So they're making the case based on 2019 numbers, but as we saw from that prior report I was looking at, we've gotten even better in 2020 and now into 2021. Because of the pandemic, we've done a lot more to even further increase this. So these are older numbers, but this report again came out kind of to counter some of the talk about what the Biden infrastructure plan might try to do. They've got $100 billion of broadband funds that they're trying to get approved, and they're concerned about that. So here we go here. Let's see. Whoop. So share of households with fixed broadband subscription at any speed. So not only do more Americans have access to high-speed broadband, significantly more have also adopted the service. So we've got better adoption here in the United States. They don't have a 2019 for some reason here in the US, but we can see that we are over the EU in broadband adoption. And that's one of the concerns that we have is, why are people not adopting it? Does it have to do with price, their income level? Is it just they don't want it? And there's always that. I mean, you can provide somebody with the opportunity to get broadband. You can even give them free broadband. And if they just don't want it, they're not going to get it. So there's always going to be some number of people, some percentage, that don't get it, regardless of the price. But we're doing very good on adoption. Share of households with fixed broadband at greater than or equal to 30 megabits per second. You can see the US surpassed the EU here, and that gap has pretty much stayed the same through 2018. US consumer take-up rates nearly 10 percentage points ahead of EU customers at that level. Share of households with fixed broadband subscription at 100 megabits per second or greater, and you can see big gap here. The US has climbed while the EU has leveled off here the last few years. The fastest speeds, the US has a 20+ percentage point lead on broadband adoption. And then this is the share of households with broadband subscriptions at 3 speed intervals. So they are showing less than 25 megabits per second, so that's less than the FCC definition of broadband. 25 megabits per second to 100, and then 100 or over. And you see here, this is the US, and this gray area being the less than 25. You can see that that has decreased significantly over time. You've had an increase in the blue, the 25 megabits per second to 100, and then a big increase in the over 100 megabits per second. You've seen less of these increases here in the EU in that case. And then why is the US ahead? Telecom infrastructure investment 2012 through 2018. You can see the investment here. The US is spending a lot more. Per household, average annual investment, $708 annually average per household. So you can see that's one of the reasons why the U.S. is ahead. So again, that's the U.S. Telecom report. There's one other thing I wanted to cover today, and that's the kind of demographics. This is a Pew Research Center internet study, and this is for 2021, so this just came out last month. And they've been doing this study for a while, internet use over time. When Pew Research Center began systematically tracking Americans' internet usage in early 2000, wow, that's forever ago, about half of all adults were already online. Today, 93% of American adults use the internet. So we've got great adoption. You can see here, this was 2000, 52%, climbing steadily over time up to 93% now. And you don't see that much of an increase here at this point, which is surprising. You know, I would have thought you would have seen a little bit of a peak up there with the pandemic, but I think a lot of people had internet already, so this is probably just talking about who's using the internet. Everybody kind of had it. I think some of the increases we've seen have been speeds, and then maybe was somebody relying on their mobile internet before, and then they decided to go ahead and get a fixed wireline kind of connection at home to do some of the things that they had to do at home now. Who uses the internet? So adoption gaps remain based on factors such as age, income, and education. So again, various people are going to not use the internet for various reasons. Here we're looking at age, and this lower line, this is 65 plus, and you can see that gap has narrowed over time, but you would expect that anybody who's 65 or plus is going to be those that are least likely to use the internet. These other lines are kind of converging here very close. Again, the gap has decreased over time. You've got 87% in 2018, 88%, and up to 96% for 30 to 49, I believe that is. And then you've got, or maybe that's 30, oh, that's 30 to 49. This one is 50 to 64. That's right, 50 to 64. So folks in my age group right there. Then you've got 30 to 49, 97%, all the way up to 98%, and then 99% here in 2021 for 18 to 29. So there's very little difference between these age groups right here as we look at that. So that's good news. And again, I think this particular demographic is always going to be quite a bit lower because at some point people are just not using the internet when they get to be that age. This is showing the percent of U.S. adults who say they have a broadband connection at home, and there obviously was a big increase here in the 2000s. And it's kind of leveled off. 2018, this is 2019, and then 2020. So we did see an uptick here, and we did see a little bit of an uptick here in up to 2021, now up to 77%. Again, I thought that might be a little higher increase this last year, but maybe they don't have all the data at this point. Who has home broadband? Racial minorities and those with lower levels of education and income are less likely to have broadband service at home. And you know, you would expect that as far as the income level. Here again, we're looking at age. We kind of looked at that. Then we've got race, and you know, the gap kind of remains there. We're looking at 65% Hispanic, 71% for Black, and then 80% for white as far as who has this is a home internet connection, right? Gender, not much difference when you look at gender between men and women. They pretty much track the same. Income level, obviously this is going to be a factor. It surprised me that it was much as a factor as it was. I would think at a certain point it would be pretty much the same at some of these income levels, but you would understand that people making less than 30,000 maybe don't have a home internet connection. They would have their mobile connection, but maybe they don't have the disposable income to have a home internet connection. Then you've got, this is your 30 to 50,000 or so, you got 74%. Then you've got 50 to 75,000, 87%. And then if you get over that, you got 92%, over 75,000. Then we look at smartphone dependency over time. So that went up, but it's a fairly flat line, relatively speaking, and actually trended down here, probably as more people were, we saw the increase that, you know, more people were getting broadband connections at home, so there's less smartphone dependency. But that does, again, the smartphone dependency does depend on things like income level, for example. So here we've got age, and we do have this is percent of U.S. adults who say they do not use broadband at home but own smartphones. So surprisingly, the 18 to 29, no, not surprising, I'm sorry, 18 to 29 range, these are people that maybe never had what are called cord nevers. They never had a hardline broadband connection, so they've kind of always used their cell phone. And again, their disposable income is going to be a little bit less, so they're relying on their phone. Maybe they don't think they need anything. So you've got that at 28%. Here we're looking at 50 to 64 at 34% or 13%, and what is this? 30 to 49, 11%. So these are real close here. But then you've got your folks again, your younger folks that are just pretty much on mobile phones. So that's interesting. Look, actually, I was going to look here at race and gender and those kinds of things. So race, there's a bit of a gap here as well. It's not that big. So you go from 12% white, 70% black, and then Hispanic 25%. So Hispanics are most likely to rely on just their phone. And then, but again, they're all fairly close compared to some of these other gaps that we see. Gender, generally no difference at all. They pretty much track. Income, again, is where you're going to see a factor, because this is going to determine whether somebody has a disposable income to have both a mobile phone, the broadband, data service, and a wired connection. So we've got down here, this is 75,000 plus, and most people, you have 6%. So very few. Most have one, and as we saw in the other one, most people have the broadband connection. Then we've got 50 to 75,000, 10%, 30,000 to 50,000, 19%, and then again, the lowest income levels are going to be most likely to be relying on a smartphone. So less than 30,000, 27% are relying on a smartphone. So anyway, so you can see here, there's I think the main point from this is that the U.S. is doing very well as far as broadband deployment. The pandemic did show us that we have some things that we need to address. And again, this tends to be in more rural areas where there's not been, or maybe low-income areas where there's not been a significant return on investment, let's say, for a provider to go in. And it does tend to be in the rural areas more so, because urban areas tend to have pretty good broadbands. But if you've got rural, you've got only a few customers per mile, maybe a few customers, maybe one customer per several miles, it's expensive to provide broadband. If you're doing wireless or you're doing satellite, it doesn't really matter, or it's less important. You still wireless, I guess it is more important because you still have a coverage area that you've got. But when you're trying to lay fiber to those kinds of places, it's expensive. It's expensive to deploy it, and then it's going to be more expensive just generally to operate it because you've got fewer customers per mile as you're doing maintenance, those kinds of things. So we've got some challenges, but as we've also saw from this data, we've really made a significant impact and really narrowed those gaps over time, especially in the last year. So as we make decisions about how we're going to spend money in the future, whether it's $100 billion or if the Republicans have put forward $65 billion for broadband, how are we going to spend that? What are we going to do? Are we going to invest in things that are going to help the private internet industry continue to do what they're doing, which has been narrowing that gap really quickly, maybe some public-private partnerships, maybe taking away some barriers from municipalities where there's not good internet, but maybe saying that, if there's not a provider there, yes, you can, but if there is a provider there, maybe you can't. I don't know how they're going to balance this because we've got parties on both sides. Some want no municipalities to get in the business, and others say they should be in the business regardless. So there's a lot of compromise there, but I think over time we'll see that broadband service here in the United States is good and it's going to be getting better. So we need to just spend whatever money we get wisely. So hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give me a thumbs up on the video there on YouTube, and you can subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button, click the little button, or click the little bell, and you'll be notified whenever we post a video when I'm live. And I am live once a week for Tech Tuesday. I will see you next time. Hope you have a great day. See you then. Bye-bye.